Welcome to the HER Digital Asset Group podcast series, where we interview thought leaders in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. Today, we are very excited to have Kyle Wang, Head of Business Development at Hub Token, a human trust protocol focused on reputation data and portable trust. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to join the ranks of so many of your other esteemed guests as well. I'm just so impressed with what HGR is doing. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here today.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have you talk about Hub and some of the work that you're doing in the blockchain crypto space. So to begin, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in blockchain and crypto?
Sure. So I really just kind of fell into it. I had spent my background's, in sales with tech at IBM, right? Sales solutions, some work with Hyperledger Fabric, right, which is IBM's private blockchain solution. And during my time at IBM, I really became very interested in the idea of cryptocurrencies with my background in finance, right? How they might fit into an investment portfolio, right? Since they're so uncorrelated to other asset classes. And as I dug deeper into it, coincidentally, this was around the time when Ethereum was spiking from $8 all the way up to $400, right? And there was just this intense mania and energy in the market, right? I really wanted to understand, what exactly is Ethereum? And I quickly realized how little I knew, right? I read one of these blogs by Vitalik, the Ethereum Jesus, right? And I quickly realized just how little I knew, and I fell down that rabbit hole. And the deeper I went, the more interested I became in the tech itself. Um, I challenged myself to write about it, just to learn more quickly, right? Because if you publish something on the internet, you can really expect to hold yourself to a higher standard, or the people of the internet will, right? So just through that, I started inadvertently making a lot of friends, meeting a lot of people, and it wasn't long before I took my addiction into the real world and started meeting many of my friends online in person, right, at conferences, etc. Just through a big circuitous route, I started working with some Chinese blockchain delegations, started supporting some projects right overseas, coming to the US, and just little by little, in a completely undetermined path, right, I really came to my where I'm working today, right? I had left IBM just a couple months ago to join this startup Hub, right, which is focused on reputation and trust.
So strangely enough, your story actually sounds like a lot of the co-founders on HDR. Tao Tao similarly began investing in Ethereum before the huge spike, and then
Right.
through that got into the rabbit hole of reading all this material and then meeting people at conferences. And now within just a year or two, he's already a pretty established person in this space. So it's actually really interesting just to see how quickly people can ramp up here.
Right. I hope we can become best friends.
Yeah. So you mentioned Hub. Can you tell us a little bit more about your project, otherwise known as the Human Trust Protocol?
Sure. There's a lot of, if you've, waded through our white paper, you'll realize it's kind of more on the technical side, but just an easy way to think about it is, today there's a lot of issues, right, online, right? And one way to think about it is, Bitcoin really solved the issue of third-party trust, right? Of being able to remove the intermediary, right, and transact in a sense peer-to-peer, right, directly with your counterparty. But the other issue that hasn't been solved yet is just how we might work with that counterparty, right? In the real world, if we kind of break down what trust and, in a sense, reputation, if we break it down, you really trust, a family member or a friend in real life or a business partner because you've had a long history of positive outcomes or successful interactions with that person, right? Whether from a business sense, a family sense, a relationship sense, and we store all of that in our brain, right? So we know this person, we have a history, and then that enables us to predict their future behavior, right? But online, now that commerce has expanded so much, it's become so global, we can meet people and transact with people across the world. And there's a lot of friction there, right? Whether we have distributed ledger technology or not, right? Whether we're using Bitcoin or not, there's this huge issue with, how can we trust this other person, right? What can we do? And the methods we have are fairly primitive, right? We depend a lot on whether it's third parties or intermediaries who store a lot of data, right? KYC, AML data. We depend on social networks, right? That kind of encapsulate reputation in and of themselves, right? Whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, or more marketplaces such as Amazon or eBay, right? So there's a lot of, it kind of scales up and down. If you meet a stranger, the first thing you do is what at IBM we called social scraping, right? Where you go online and you, in effect, you stalk them, right? But you look at their YouTube, their Twitter, and you kind of piece together this picture of this person, right? How many followers do they have? How many people online believe in them? How much social proof or credit they have? So it's all very, very hit or miss, very primitive, right? Um, and what we're trying to do at Hub is, and what the founder at Hub is trying to do is use this new wave of technology, blockchain, right? Where for the first time we can have persistent, immutable transactions, right, and identities. Use that to our advantage and finally create a way where we can actually trust the other person we're interacting with, or have some sort of immutable record or reputation history, so we can be confident in the trustworthiness of the other person.
Thanks for sharing that. Definitely sounds like a very compelling project. And so, a couple of things that you mentioned there around trust and reputation. Because of that, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of blockchain facilitating greater levels of inclusion. The
Sure.
2 billion people today are cut off from financial services because they don't have the necessary identification or bank accounts. But with blockchain, individuals can theoretically establish their reputation, like you said, through their interactions and past behavior. Can you discuss, go into more detail, how the Hub token can foster economic inclusion specifically?
Sure, certainly. And I will say that, Hub by itself, we're a middleware project, right? So I guess one thing I do want to make a quick distinction about is that we don't really consider ourselves an identity project, right? So there's certainly a lot of identity service providers out there, such as Sovereign, Civic, Uport, et cetera. But our service is more focused on creating a reputation history, right? Which is another way to think about it is just a long, record of positive or negative interactions, right, encapsulated on blockchain, right? So just to kind of follow up on your first question very quickly, for instance, if you transact with a number of people, right, whether this could be building a website or a real estate contract, et cetera, and there's a lot of positive results over time, it can be said that you're a trustworthy person, right, and we can predict your future behavior. When it comes to financial inclusion, right, a large issue with many people, especially in less developed countries, right, they have a complete lack of identity. Period. Right. There's just no way that they could ever have access to the banking system or um, any access to the large global online market, right? Just because there's really no way for them to get a bank account, which means there's really no way for them to pay people online, right, or across the world. So I believe with blockchain, just a very, very great advantage here is that for the first time, we don't have to rely on some third-party service provider, right? That we have to assume is trustworthy, or that we have to really take it on faith that they'll do everything in these people's best interest. For the first time, as you know, in a lot of these even underdeveloped countries, mobile payments are kind of, I think, the first point of contact, right, where we can really use blockchain to bring a lot of these people together. And indeed, there's a number of great social impact projects out there, right, that are really trying to whether introduce payments, renewable energy, get a lot of these people on the grid, right? Even just having electricity, right, so that they can access the internet. So with blockchain itself, hopefully this makes sense. We're able to kind of build out this kind of distributed kind of network, right, where people might be able to join just from their mobile devices, right, and pay people in a decentralized manner, but more importantly, associate a persistent identity, right, based on blockchain. Right now, you could just say it's a wallet address, right? But hopefully, with other services such as these identity service providers I mentioned already, and Hub's kind of reputation history, right, will enable a lot of these people to not only begin transacting, right, with the rest of the world, but also build a history of their positive transactions and outcomes so that they can join the global community.
I think as I was getting into blockchain myself, this was one aspect of the promise that really drew me in. So I'm really excited to see what your team can do for this area.
If I could add a quick point here, so it's not related to Hub specifically, but it's just a tremendous story I heard. Not just specific to financial inclusion, but just even from the areas of charity or just even support, right? Supporting these people in less developed countries. One of my friends, who's a miner out of Chicago, went on a mission trip, right? I believe to Ghana, right, where he met a woman with with three children, and she's just trying to take care of them and really trying to get by, right? But what he did was, this woman had a mobile phone, right? So he showed her how to set up, an Ethereum Classic or Ethereum wallet, right? And he kind of taught her how to convert it, right, to fiat, or how to spend it, or how to use the wallet, right? So now every single month, out of Chicago, out of his mining farm, he mines Ethereum Classic and Ethereum, right? And it goes directly into her wallet, right, through the power of blockchain. And that was just such a tremendous story to me, because she gets immediate access to these funds, doesn't have to go through any intermediary, right? And suddenly she's empowered, right, in a way that, many of these other charitable organizations really struggle with, right? All that friction has been removed. So I think that was just a tremendous story for me, in a way that, blockchain could directly impact someone's lives, right, through social impact.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So moving along, you obviously have a really, really strong team. In addition to yourself, you have the co-founder of LinkedIn, Eric Lee, and someone we're all very familiar with, Miko Matsumiura, who I actually spoke with a few months ago for another podcast. Can you tell us what it's like working with these visionaries and kind of share your team's long-term vision for Hub?
Sure. It is really tremendous working with all of these amazing people, right? It was just fascinating over these past couple months. I'm still quite new at Hub, but I've had the good fortune of just hearing more of the stories, right, of these other teams, of kind of Eric, building out LinkedIn with Reed and the other co-founders, right, and what that whole experience was like. His frustration with the fact that LinkedIn, never really became as optimal of a social or of a reputation system as it could be, right? Because it was just all focused on self-reported claims, right? Like I could go home right now and I could write that I'm part of HDR, right? And most of my friends, I believe, on LinkedIn would probably believe me, right? Just because social media has grown so large. And Miko himself also brings such a um, tremendous amount of marketing experience, right, from his time as a Sun Java evangelist and his great standing within the community. But overall, I'm just very, very humbled to work with such people who are just so intelligent, right, and are such visionaries in almost every way, right? One joke I was just saying, that at the very beginning when I first joined Hub, we were assembling our team page, right, and without exception, it just so happened that almost everyone on the team, they were all graduates of Stanford, right? So I did not end up going to Stanford, but my father did. So I just joked, all right, let me fit in. I'll just write son of a Stanford grad, right? And we'll just, carry through the deck that way. But working with these visionaries, just one thing that I noticed is that they're always very much focused on, what the next what's going to happen to the next 100 million users, right? Like, what does the next 5 or 10 years look like? I have particular respect for Eric, because even after his great success with LinkedIn, he kept making products, right? He kept, going down the path of entrepreneurship. He's really someone that really wants to continue to change the world, right? Definitely doesn't want to rest on his laurels, but just continue to affect change, right? And that really, was really, really inspiring to me. And to us with Hub, I think it's just great to have someone like that, right? Who's really, really, who's really, really committed to the vision. And he's committed because he could really just, buy a beach house and that's it, right? Um, but within Hub, right, he's really envisioning this future uh, where transactions online, where whenever people transact online or try to participate in marketplaces or or communities online, that validation is or verification is the norm, right? There should never be a situation where someone can self-report or claim have a self-reported claim and let that be the fact, right? So everything should be verified, right? That's, I think, where the future is moving toward. We definitely have a lot of challenges, because right now the best way for that to happen is to have some third party do it for you, right? Whether that's Equifax, right, or whether that's a social network like Facebook. But I think with blockchain, and I really buy into this vision, we'll one day have this ability where we can actually say, hey, I went to Stanford and here's my diploma on Stanford's blockchain to prove it, right? I worked at Google for 3 years, right? And here is Google's attestation to that fact, right? For those years that I worked there. And I think, as technology, improves, as blockchain grows more streamlined, I think that kind of future will really make commerce a lot more efficient, right? It'll remove so much friction, and it'll lower a lot of these barriers, right? And hopefully include a lot more people within our financial system and the great, market out here that's dependent on trust.
On that note, kind of want to talk a little bit about this idea of fake profiles and fake interactions because, as you said, you can just go home on LinkedIn and post anything about yourself, and people will have to sort of take your word for it. And this is true in a lot of different social media platforms that we use today. So, what kind of applications of blockchain or Hub will be used in social media specifically, and how do you think it'll reshape this industry?
The interesting thing with Hub is that we don't really find many other projects that compete with us directly in the sense that they're also building out, a more inclusive trust middleware. But there are a number of projects out there that really validate the need for some of the use cases, right, that are just as applicable to our project. So one of them that you're mentioning now is, of course, social media networks or platforms. You see a lot of other interesting platforms out there that are trying to do something similar, whether it's LinkedIn on a more jobs marketplace, social media kind of hybrid, right? So projects such as Doc.io or Springroll, for instance, right? And we think that, it's very good to have more projects focusing on this, right? Focusing on this space. Not only is it validating the need for it, but the fact is, there doesn't have to be the more competition, the better, right? The more social networks out there that are trying to create a credible alternative that can really bring on the next, 50 million, 100 million, 1 billion users, right? That's definitely the way to go. Um, More blockchain specific, I think, in one of the examples I'd mentioned earlier, right? One of these smaller kind of proof of concepts that we're working on with Hub is just to take advantage of some of the open APIs of these social media platforms, right? So LinkedIn, for instance, whose API Eric is very intimately familiar with, we can simply, give users the option, right, to download or offload much of their centralized reputation data right now that's owned by LinkedIn, right? So when a recruiter messages you, or if someone sends you spam, right, through LinkedIn Navigator, they pay LinkedIn to do it, right? But we can have people, we could have users offload that data, right? Put it on a decentralized identity or decentralized reputation profile, right? And then have them use blockchain to verify it, right? So one immediate use case we're thinking about is working with MIT and Stanford, right, as along with BYU and some other universities who are putting their diplomas on blockchain to simply help them monetize that data, right? That's just sitting there. So at Stanford, it makes sense, right? You have your diploma on blockchain. It's just sitting there. They can monetize it, but it's also important to them that people online aren't misusing Stanford's brand, right, for their own benefit. So we really see how this ecosystem could kind of take place between universities, attestations, right, users being able to definitively say that they went to a specific school or have a specific skill set or work at a specific company, and removing all of this friction for recruiters who are often facing a lot of friction and headwinds just trying to verify whether someone's profile is in fact legitimate and making costly hiring decisions based on it, right? So I understand this is a more specific job marketplace example, but even with Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, et cetera, it could be quite trivial. Well, not trivial, but it is definitely it's definitely within the realm of imagination to think that one day that these services can really be offloaded, or can we really be transferred into a blockchain kind of backbone, right, where users all have independent, right, verifiable identities on blockchain, right, that you can't simply go and create 100,000 IP addresses and use a bot to create all these profiles, right, to kind of serve your own nefarious ends, right? So I think it's definitely a difficult and definitely an area that needs a lot more work, right? A lot of people have come and asked our project whether LinkedIn themselves are working on something with blockchain, but it's tough, right? Because they'd be disrupting their own business model, right? It's definitely in the interest of Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, to really have as much control over users' data as they can, right? Not only to monetize it, but also because it's just the very core of what they offer, right? You use their service for free. Um, and they need to use your data for analytics, right, for marketing purposes, et cetera. And I think that the next big revolution will just be this data returning to the hands of the user or the consumer, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. if other companies are able to make money off of your data, then the users themselves should essentially be able to monetize it in some
Right.
way, one way or another.
A really easy way to think about it is once again, again, back to the jobs marketplace, right? Every time someone sends you a message, they're paying LinkedIn, right? But really, they should just be paying you, right? And blockchain can make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so some of the points that you brought up just now are very important related to identity, authenticity, and transparency. These are important for social media platforms to verify from a profile perspective because if you think about it, individuals on these platforms have a lot of influence. If it's on LinkedIn, if you have a false type of profile, then you could be hired for a company that you're not a good fit for, and that's costly to
Mhm.
that organization. So I think being able to figure that out is something the social media platform should move to. And I think a lot of the companies are thinking of playing around with this space. Facebook recently just announced that they're starting a blockchain group. It'll be interesting to see where some of these platforms play out.
It will certainly be very, very interesting. I think Facebook is definitely one to watch, right? Whether the rumors are, whether how far they make it with their own cryptocurrency, right, and what that'll kind of look like. But even if it doesn't, turn out to be, if it doesn't turn out to be the decentralized dream of some of the more hardcore people in this space, I think in the end, even these more centralized companies experimenting with blockchain as a whole is a good thing, right? Because it brings so much more awareness to blockchain's capabilities and helps it better enter the public consciousness.
So on your website, your introductory presentation indicated that the Hub protocol can facilitate greater trust in peer-to-peer marketplaces, specifically between buyers and sellers of products and services. What does this mean for the sharing economy as we know it today? In a sense, how will popular internet era platforms such as Airbnb and Uber be affected by blockchain technology?
Sure. And I think in the case of Airbnb and Uber, right, we already have certain blockchain analogs that are being developed, right? Whether that's Arcade City, right, which is decentralized rideshare, or you might have heard of a B token or Beehive, right, which is working on a decentralized Airbnb. So those are just kind of certain examples of how some very ambitious teams are really already taking a crack at it. From Hub's perspective, we're definitely open to partnering with other projects for the implementation of our protocol. But I think the chief difference is today, right? You look at services like Uber and Airbnb and some of these others, such as even like Uber Eats, right, or something where you're just ordering food, right? A lot of it is again kind of like eBay, where there is a reputation system built in, right? On Airbnb, you can leave reviews of guests, and guests can leave reviews of hosts, right? And the same with eBay, etc. But I think the one issue with these reputation systems is once again that they're very much siloed, right? You could be a Yelp elite, right? A very trusted reviewer on Yelp, but you go to TripAdvisor and you try to do the same thing, and you have to build your reputation from scratch, right? You have to build yourself up again in a completely different community. Um, and that's really quite a shame because there's a lot of economic opportunity that's lost, right? Or a lack of efficiency there, right? But with blockchain, right, if you have a persistent ID or reputation history that you can carry cross-platform, right, it just simply makes a lot of sense, right? If you are very very great, if you're very trustworthy and you have a great kind of um, sense for food reviews, or you're a great driver, right? If there's a marketplace out there of different rideshare services on blockchain, there's really no conceivable reason, right, they wouldn't want you to use your identity profile and immediately get onboarded, right, on these different services or areas, right? So you can immediately gain more drivers or users right off the bat, right? So I think that's just a great way to disrupt a lot of these specific peer-to-peer marketplaces. It just right now, in all honesty, the tech is still very young, right? There's a lot of experimentation and there's a lot of proof of concept, but I think that's certainly no reason to be pessimistic about the space. I think that over time, right, we'll definitely develop more and more efficient solutions, better UI, UX, right? And hopefully we'll get to a point where users will begin realizing, hey, we can use a decentralized rideshare application, right, that allows me to use a persistent reputation profile that I can come on to the platform. And the best part is it costs me less because there's not as much overhead that I have to pay to, a third party service such as Uber, right? who ends up monetizing my data anyway, right? So I think the advantages are there. It's just the UI, UX, and the technology needs to evolve to follow.
And I would imagine beyond just the technology being young, adoption is going to be probably a major barrier for some of these decentralized versions of Airbnb and Uber or Amazon to take off.
Right.
I think what Airbnb and Uber have on their hand is that they already have the network. What's going to stop them from upgrading their infrastructure to blockchain, rethinking their business model and shift there?
Yeah, I would say it's not even what's going to stop them. I think they have to, right? But I think at the same time, they're also in a difficult place because, Uber itself, like if you really think about Uber, it's not really a rideshare company in a way, if you think about it, right? If you think about what they're actually doing, right? They have a very, very interesting business model where they really disrupted the ground transportation industry, right? The taxi kind of industry, right? Through their drivers by undercutting them, right? By offering much lower cost rideshare vehicles. And then they're moving into the area of automated driving, right? But really, Uber is a tech company, right? And they're really really innovating in many many other ways, right? So I think they're really realizing this, that it's very difficult in kind of the same way with LinkedIn, right? It's really difficult for them to just kind of stretch out and let's decentralize our service, because in the end, like companies like Uber and Airbnb, if you really dig deep into it, they're really data companies, right? That's really the marketplace of the future, right? That's really the currency of the future. It's all data, right? The amount of crazy data that Uber has enables them to move into all these other exciting areas, right? I wouldn't even say it's too far fetched to think that Uber will move into many other technological areas. If you're familiar with many South Korean companies. I recently had the pleasure of meeting with the tech insights team at SK Telecom, right, which is a very large telecom company in South Korea. And what's just very interesting to me, and it's certainly not limited to SK Telecom, but they're not just a telecom company, right? It's just there's not really any comparison with AT&T or Comcast, because they're working on smart cities, blockchain applications, IoT, right? Smart meters, all these different areas, right? So, but a large focus of it is like, hey, how can we use, right, the immense amount of data that we have, right? So, to your comment, like what's to stop them from innovating? I don't think they really have a choice, right? I think a lot of these companies are kind of seeing uh, the writing on the wall, right? It's coming one day where there will be decentralized services that can offer things at a lower cost, right? In some manner or fashion, right? It's just a matter of how will they implement this kind of technology. They can certainly, increase more, take out more middlemen from within their own organization, which many banks are in fact using blockchain technology for, right? But for them to completely, commit to a decentralized kind of service, right? In the vein of, and I'm not saying that these will be the winners, right? But in the vein of Arcade City or B Token, I think it's definitely just such an incredible stretch, right? And it will definitely take a lot of innovation. Um, and I guess the parting thought I'll leave with this question is just that you look at like services like MySpace, right, or services that have were just so entrenched once upon a time, you couldn't imagine them failing, right? Like horse and buggy companies, right? Another way to kind of think about it. We're always at a place where we think, these companies are too big to fail and they have all this critical mass. But I think history has really shown that, if the right incentive structures are there, right, it is really possible to really disrupt some of these multi-billion-dollar industries. And I'm very excited to see, where that next, huge dark horse might come from within the blockchain space.
I'm excited to see that as well. And I think just this blockchain revolution has gotten many incumbents to think about their business and how they really recognize the threat and are trying to get ahead of the curve and paint their side of the story with
Right.
blockchain.
I'll just add that really quickly. I'm also, maybe this is slightly an unpopular opinion, but I could say that the future, there is room here for some compromise too, right? Because there are certainly benefits to centralization as well, right? Venmo, PayPal, right? Some of these, the banking system, right, in first world countries, they largely work, right? And people like the convenience of it. So I think there certainly is a large gap, right, between where blockchain tech and the user experience is today to what people are comfortable with, right? So perhaps in the future, it might be a transitionary phase, right? Or it might be more of a, end state, whatever that means. But I think there are definitely certain centralized, systems that could coexist or use blockchain to their advantage. I wouldn't count that out entirely, right? But it's at the same time we can't say that in 50 years maybe decentralized systems and blockchain will be the default.
Right. And I totally agree with that. I don't think even in 50 years, our world will just be entirely decentralized. I think people are inherently uncomfortable with that. But I do
Exactly.
think that there's some industries or some places where decentralization does make sense and that with the right amount of centralization put in place. And so I want to switch gears a little bit away from Hub and talk about crypto. 2018 has been quite bearish for the crypto markets. Do you think this is good or bad for someone like you who is fully invested in the blockchain space?
Well, I can tell right off the bat, it's never fun to open your Blockfolio or Delta app and just see all these red numbers, right? But I think, and even today, right? I think Bitcoin's dipping below 8,000 again, and we're wondering whether this is the second dip, right? The second V of the W, right? But I think overall, it's still a good thing, right? I think it's very easy in the crypto space to get addicted to crazy swings upward, right? Like, hey, my favorite coin is up 80%. Or I remember it was a surreal moment in a Telegram group where someone said, oh man, this ICO only did 3x for me. I was really expecting 12x, right? So I think, some healthy corrections every once in a while make a lot of sense, right? So what kind of market would you ever be in where the only direction is up, right? That would be, essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? Or there would be something really off about that. But I think, as an investor, you really do have to ride the wave of crypto, right? Depending on how all in you are. For someone like myself, you're indeed correct. I'm very, very I'm very committed, very, very much invested in the blockchain space. I'm young. It's a time to be speculative, right? It's a time to take these kind of outsized risks. But I think, even if we pull it out and scale out a bit more to the fund level, right? I think you can see a lot of funds also wisening up to this idea that, we should really diversify and offer some other services, right? Um, there's a lot of investment crypto hedge funds or just crypto funds that are popping up every week, right? But they're quickly realizing that they're at the mercy of this roller coaster, right? Every time markets tank, they can't stop their LPs from pulling out a lot of money, right? They're really at the mercy of the markets, and it really doesn't matter how well diversified you are, right, within the crypto markets, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is still just very highly correlated, right? So I just think it's fascinating, and you'll see this in Western firms like, say, like Galaxy Digital, or if you look overseas at like Huobi Labs and the Huobi Group as a whole, right? They're diversifying in a ton of very interesting areas: mining farms, OTC desks, merchant and investment banking, right? Advisory services. So they're really trying to build out this massive ecosystem. You see Coinbase with custody solutions as well, right? And I think that that's really the key, right? Even as an individual investor, not to really lose your head, to have some amount of diversification too, so that you do have some cash on hand for crypto winter and when the times are bad. But overall, right, without dips, right, without corrections, right, how could you ever buy in, right? How can you ever buy low and sell high if there are never lows?
Yeah, and we actually had Jack Tater, the author of Crypto Assets, on one of our earlier podcasts, and he was the
Awesome.
one that indicated everyone should have a little bit of Bitcoin in their portfolio to save for retirement. So I think the uncorrelated aspect of crypto asset class is
Right.
something that retail investors should look into.
I think it was just incredible. It was just a Reddit thread where someone said, "Hey guys, I'm buying a Bitcoin today at about $8,000, and my hope is in 20 years it'll pay for my child's college fund." So we'll see. Best of luck to that guy. But I thought that was a very fun concept.
Are there any coins that you're particularly passionate about?
I am. It's definitely hard not to be biased in this space, right? Because, the coins that you're passionate about are traditionally the ones that have done well for you, right? But I think overall, I just, a large part of this space that I love is just meeting, not even just like the returns, right? Or the cryptocurrency or the trading itself, but just meeting the fantastically smart teams behind, a lot of these projects, right? I really couldn't imagine another area, right? even in the tech world, where maybe if you're a VC or specifically a VC or that reason, where you can just meet so many founders and team members who are very open about their projects, right? Give you a lot of access to them and their great ideas, and you can just see them at work, right? So if I wanted to just call one out of many, right, in my mind, I can certainly say like Zilliqa, for instance, is a project recently that's been getting a lot of press, which I believe is very well deserved, right? Um, Even when I first spoke to the team, right, maybe back in October or so, I could just tell that these were just superstars, right? This group of PhDs out of Singapore, tremendous ideas around sharding and getting it implemented, right, on a test net and actually delivering results. So that's just like one example where I guess my love of a lot of the coins that I'm holding or personally am invested in, a lot of it has to do with the team, right? And if you could just spare if you could just spare me, I guess one other kind of memory I had was just meeting the Neo team in San Francisco. Right, we stayed at an Airbnb together, and I got to know Da Hongfei, Li Jun, and Johnson, right, who are all associated with on-chain and ontology as well. And these were just some of the most incredible and genuine people I've ever met. Right. Again, if you wouldn't mind a quick anecdote with the founder of Neo, right? I learned more about his backstory, which was just so inspiring to me. Where immediately after Neo's ICO, right, one of Neo's largest angel investors ended up dumping the coin, right, which sent it plummeting below ICO price, right? And this was an environment where ICOs were just expected to do well, right? So at the time, the founder of Neo was really one of the least liked people in China, right? Many of his fans and investors were so angry at him, called him horrible names and just said like, you tricked us, you lost all this money, right? But he persevered, right? He kept working on the project. He kept, giving like small university lectures just to live paycheck to paycheck and make some money. And it was just very inspiring because the international development community discovered the project, right, and essentially saved him and lifted him up, right, pushed the price up through their demand, right, and belief in this project. So even to this day, and I hope he doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but whenever he's at these meetups and he's very thankful to the international developer community, it comes from the heart because they actually quite literally saved him, right? They brought him back up, right, out of this horrible dark place he was in because they believed in his vision and the product, right? And in a way, that to me was just an amazing expression of what the blockchain space is, right? Great ideas and a huge community that's able to, take part and make those ideas successful.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. That is actually one of the reasons why I love the blockchain community. It feels like one of those places where good work and perseverance is actually valued. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Before I let you go, do you have any advice for crypto enthusiasts who may want to transition into the crypto space?
Yeah, I realize I have a lot of friends, in more mainstream professions. So they always ask me, what are some of the materials you've read that have really helped you get into cryptocurrency or the blockchain space, or how could they get involved, right? I wish I had a better answer because my own story is very fragmented, where I just Googled anything I didn't know, right? And I just kind of, read a ton of different things and just slowly built up my knowledge base from there, right? And it was particularly difficult for me because I don't have a software engineering background, right? So it's just picking up the pieces bit by bit. But I think the number one piece of advice I'd give them is just take advantage of the greatest asset, right, in the blockchain space, which is community, right? I realize this is a little more tough, a little tough if you're living in more rural or less kind of connected area. But if you're in one of the cities like New York or San Francisco or Boston or Chicago or what have you, definitely attend, meetups, right? There's so many events going on all the time. I've lived in Cleveland for about a year, and even in Cleveland, you can find some really quality meetups and people, right, just to talk about the space. So if I can do it, right, anyone can, right? But just take advantage of this community, right, within the city, online as well, because the one great thing about the blockchain space is that everybody loves to talk about it, right? Loves to talk about the tech, their favorite projects, where the space is going. And it was really through the community that I made so many great connections, made so many great friends, that really led me to working at a number of blockchain projects. And really led me to this fantastic job that I'm at today, right? And none of it was intentional. It was just, talking to different people, and some of them just turned out to be very, very friendly and generous, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense. I would say don't stress out too much about getting some sort of certification or really trying to read a specific like subset of books or anything like that. But please do so if it's of help, right? But I think the number one thing is just engage with the right people, have an open mind, and just get to work and learn more about the technology and have fun while doing so.
Thank you so much, Kyle. We really appreciate you joining our podcast and sharing your thoughts on blockchain and crypto, as well as talking about Hub and the projects going on. So really, really excited to have you.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope the rest of your podcasts go very well as well.